Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building. It's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BS and no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record
I thought I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something?
Happy Friday afternoon, Corey.
It is a happy Friday, and it is afternoon.
Yeah. Is the weather as beautiful there as it is here in Montana?
I commented to my wife before I came into the office this morning that this is probably the best day of the year this morning for weather.
Yeah, it's a good thing that every day isn't like this, or it'd be so crowded out here you'd have to bring your own rock to stand on. But
Yeah. Now we complain quite a bit about the winter, the 3 months of, or the 3 seasons of winter that we get here where we live. But this time of year, like the last 2 weeks, and there's always exceptions. We've had a lot of wind, we've had some extremes and different things, but the last 3 weeks, the weather we've had makes it worth putting up with 9 months of winter just for those 3 weeks. And this morning was kind of the apex of that. It was yesterday, there was a bunch of wind, a storm came through, it got really, I think the high yesterday was in the 60s.
Yep.
And then this morning it was chilly. Like it almost felt like elk season chilly. And then it started warming up just enough that it was comfortable. And I mean, it was absolutely a beautiful morning here in Idaho.
Yeah. Well, makes you think the elk will be bugling in another 2 months.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that we're only 2 months away.
Yeah. Well, that's good, right?
That's good. I just, every year it goes faster and faster, and I feel like I'm less and less prepared, and it's sneaking up on me more than it did the year before.
Well, just wait till you get 10 years older. That rate at which that change is happening accelerates. I wish I could tell you it was static, but
Man.
oh wow. But I've got about 3 weeks of archery elk hunting in the store for me this year.
Really?
So, yeah. Dustin, and Diefendorfer, who we had on the podcast, who we got a ton of good, positive comments that they enjoyed that discussion, even though I don't know that it had that much to do with technical elk hunting information, but man, appreciate all of you who weighed in and gave us positive feedback on that. But he and I are going for the last week of September in Montana. I think he's mostly just going to see. I wonder if Randy really tried hard when we were working him at the lab this last 9 months. I'm bringing a llama. I mean, I've seen what his pack looks like. I'm like, Dustin, you need me to get you a llama, or are you just going to be your own pack meal? But so I got that for a week, and then I'm going to take 2 weeks of my own time here in Montana and give it my best.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So you are, what happens if you and Dustin both kill elk before that last week of September?
I don't think we got to worry about that. That's kind of like saying, oh, I wonder what's going to happen if I win the lottery and then I forget that I don't buy lottery tickets. So
Yeah, but you're going hunting. It's different. If you weren't going hunting, then you could say, well, I'm not going to kill an elk because I'm not going to be hunting.
Well, I told him I'm not bringing my bow. I'm bringing a 20 gauge.
I should have assumed. You're not going elk hunting. You're going grouse hunting during elk season.
But I told him I'd call. I'd do whatever. So, we can do the 2-man setup. And I promised if we got a bull coming in, I'm not going to shoot a grouse. I'll let it jump up in a tree or something. But so, yeah, I think that's,
I've seen that exact scenario play out before. And I did not see you let it jump up in a tree. We had elk bugling, and pretty soon I'm turning around going, where's Randy? You're back there stalking a grouse while we have elk bugling. That's a problem. Like, that is a serious issue.
That's why you haven't invited me on any archery elk hunts since then. I don't blame you.
Say that.
So no, I don't. Unless, well, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to borrow his bow if one got close enough, because I'm just bringing a 20 gauge. I'm in charge of camp meat. So
nice.
But then I'm going out. The reason I'm giving myself 2 weeks is I'm going to do it solo, well, with a camera guy. But I really want to master the setup scenarios, and not that I probably will, but I want to make a lot more mistakes in setting up as a solo caller and trying to figure out how do you get this thing to come in where I can get a shot on him. He comes in at 20 yards and stands there behind a tree and looks at me like, I know he's right here somewhere. I'm not going to give him a shot at me. So
most people are doing things just the opposite. They're trying to find ways to improve their success, not to decrease it.
Well, the fallback to that is I do have a rifle that I can go back with in October or November. So, but that's my plan, and it kind of got me to a couple of things. Questions we got from listeners were a lot about setup stuff, and then you were kind enough to write a big part of the chapter for my elk hunting e-guide that we're wrapping up here, and you gave your. I'll say that this is like the Corey Jacobson as abbreviated gets, because I told you to keep it to 2 pages, and you spent most of those 2 or 3 pages focusing on the setup. I thought you'd get into this big dissertation about calling, and you said, no, really, you only need to know 2 calls, a cow call and a bugle, and they don't even need to be that complex. If he's responding to you, well, keep doing what he's responding to. But when we get to this setup, let me tell you about setup. So I thought,
that's we talk. Calling is everything. Calling is the exciting part. Calling is the intimidating part. It's what makes elk hunting during the rut elk hunting. Like, that's for me, that's what I live for, is the calling piece of it. That's the fun part. A lot of people get hung up on it and get intimidated by it. But really, if you're wanting to fill a tag, calling isn't the important part you need to be focusing on, because calling, it works. There's things you can do to make calling work, but you can call in 1,000 elk. And if you aren't set up in the right place and aren't thinking about the setup as the primary focus, you might not get a single opportunity. And on the flip side, if you have a good setup, it might only take 1 elk to come into your calls to get a shot and an opportunity. So I refer to setups as the critical conjuncture. And
the critical conjuncture, in other words, that critical time when everything comes together.
Everything comes together, and it decides right there in the setup, decides your success. It's not calling, it's not gear, it's not anything. It all comes to that one focal point where you decide to plop down and try to get a shot at that elk and bring him in.
Well, it sounds to me like we could just do an 8-minute podcast, and that would be the best 8 minutes that we've probably ever put on this podcast.
I don't. All right. Well, we'll let everybody go here, and thanks for joining us. No, and I mean, really, in that e-guide, I didn't spend a lot of time on calling, because calling is simple. Elk come to calls for 2 reasons. A bull elk's going to come to a call because he thinks you're a cow and it's breeding season, or he thinks you're a bull and he either needs to defend his harem, steal a harem, or just beat you up because he's got a lot of pent up aggression. So that's really what calling elk comes down to. We don't need to complicate it. We don't need to decipher this integral language that they speak. They're coming in either because they want a cow or they want to fight. And so that's what calling can be boiled down to. Setups, on the other hand, are completely dynamic. They are changing. Every step you take, your setup is going to change. So you've got to constantly be aware of a lot of things that are continually changing around you. You stop and bugle and that bull answers 200 yards away. You can look around and say, am I in a good setup? And you have to start going through that checklist of all these different factors that make a good setup. And then the bull bugles and he's 300 yards away. He's like, he's moving away. I've got to move towards him. So you move towards him 100 yards, you bugle, he answers 200 yards away, and you go through that whole checklist again. And all of a sudden he's at 60 yards coming in and you're caught red-handed right there. And you've got to make the best of what you have. All of these things are just continually changing. They're happening rapidly, but they're what makes or breaks your success. So understanding what makes a good setup, understanding how to make the best of a setup you have to give yourself the best chance of an opportunity. All of these things are really important to understand if you want to be successful as an elk hunter.
Yeah, and that's so much different than most of the rifle hunting I do, right? What's a good setup? All right, I can get in a prone position. I can get the front of my rifle on something solid, and I can brace the back of it and have 3 points, 3 axis of locked in stability. And that's all you worry about with rifle, right? If he's within 300 yards and you can do that, odds are you're putting your tag on an elk that day.
Yep. That's why I always say archery hunting starts where rifle season or rifle hunting ends. It's that 300 yards. You get to 300 yards with a rifle, it should be a slam dunk. I mean, there's things that can and do go wrong for us and for everybody else. But the reality is, if you're within 300 yards of an elk that's feeding on a hillside and you can get a shot at it, the hunt's over.
Yeah.
With archery, you see an elk feeding on a hillside at 300 yards, you're just now starting to hunt. And that hunt takes over where the rifle hunt ended.
Yeah. No, and I would say that probably 8 or 9 out of 10 times when I see a bull and I get in a setup and start getting ready to shoot at an elk in rifle season, I'm pulling a trigger. In archery season, for every 10 bulls that get within range, I'd say I'm lucky if 2 to 4 times I release an arrow.
Or 2 to 4 times you get to full draw, and then one of those times you might release an arrow.
There you go. Maybe that's better. Right?
Yeah.
So, I think that's the critical part. And it's when I tell you I'm going out for 2 weeks on my own, I just want to be better at assessing the setup. You're chasing this bull and you're kind of rolling around the shaded side of the hill, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, the thermal is a little bit different here. It's like, was I paying attention to that? Well, if I wasn't, all I hear is the rumble of footsteps. It sounds, or hoof beats. Sounds like the Pony Express or something, and
running in the opposite direction.
Yeah, screwed that up, or whatever it might be. Or I'm assuming that he's still out there, and little do I know he's been kind of coming in quietly. And all of a sudden I look up and there's a bull looking at me. This ain't gonna work very well. He already sees me. Yep. I could sit here and count the hundreds of things I've screwed up doing that. And I think the harder part of it is doing it solo. Every time I've done it with a partner, the success rates of getting the shooter close to that bull are multitudes higher than when I've tried to do it by myself.
Yeah. Well, you just have an elk. I mean, if you consider, take hunting, take the hunter out of the equation. You have 2 elk in the woods that are either the bull's coming into a cow, those are the 2 elk, or a bull's coming into another bull to fight. Both times, that cow or that other bull are making noise. They're giving away their location. That's what is enticing or attracting that bull that you're hunting to come into you. So they know where that animal is. And as they're coming in, they're trying to stay alive. They're thinking there could be danger here. Every step of the way, those elk know that there's danger that's trying to kill them. So as they're coming in, they're thinking about that, but they're only looking at that one specific area where that sound is coming from, that they know the location of that elk that's attracting them in. If that elk that's attracting them in happens to be a two-legged hunter, they know that location. So as they're coming in, they're wary. They're thinking, okay, that cow or that bull that I'm coming into is right up here on this flat. When I get up to this point, I should be able to look ahead and see that elk. And once I get visual on that elk, I can feel more comfortable. A, I see it and I know it's an elk. B, that elk is there and it's comfortable where it's at. So that means that gives me a sense of security, knowing that another elk is there and it's comfortable. When it gets to that point and it doesn't see an elk, flags start going off. I should be able to see a cow or a bull there. They're a 500 to 800 pound animal, and I don't see it. I should be able to see it. So I'm a little bit nervous. So I'm going to stay here until I do see it, or I'm going to circle around and see if I can use my nose to verify, okay, there's an elk there before I go any closer. That's the real crutch of solo hunting. You are that animal. You're making the noise. You're giving away your exact location. And now that elk's coming in, trying to pinpoint that location and verify that there's no danger before it comes any closer. Whereas when you're hunting with a partner, your partner's back behind, the elk is focused on that location, and the elk's coming into a certain point looking for the caller back there, and the shooter can take advantage of that and move himself up somewhere in between. So the elk has no idea that shooter's there. The shooter positions himself on that line where the elk's coming into the collar and takes advantage of basically being a ninja that slips in between these two people or these two elk that are having a conversation.
You interrupted their conversation, hopefully.
Well, that's the goal.
Yeah. The other part of the setup, and this isn't necessarily the setup, but I'll call it the approach. And this is what I've learned from you by hunting with you is I can't shortcut it. I can't say, well, I'll just kind of sneak through here. I know the wind isn't perfect, but I see some of the loops you've drug us around on. It's like that elk is out there 80 yards. What are we going to do a 3/4 mile loop for? Well, for the wind.
Why are we walking straight away from this elk? He's right down there bugling. Let's just move in another 60 yards and shoot. Yeah. No, and it really does. It comes down to thermals, and thermals dictate every movement. They dictate the approach as you're moving into setup. They dictate the approach or the setup. They dictate the setup as it relates to a caller and a shooter. If you have the caller and he's vocalizing and telling the elk where he's at, as that elk comes in, it's usually not going to come in on a straight line to that location. It's usually going to either take a high trail and get a visual advantage so it can look down and say, I can see 100 yards down this hillside because I have the advantage being higher and I don't see an elk, so I'm not moving off of this trail. Or it's going to slip around on the downwind side and get the wind in its favor and circle below to verify, hey, there is no danger. This really is an elk. I can smell it. Now I'll turn and go into it. And, that's the thermals are everything when you're an elk hunter, but they're especially critical when you're considering your setup.
Yeah. Well, that's the benefits of hunting non-migratory elk on flat turf. You don't have really much of a thermal. You have like the daily prevailing wind to worry about. And that usually doesn't, it's not as fickle as thermals, You get these elk, it's obvious they live on this landscape 24/7, 365 because they go to these little saddles and drainages at the head of them where they know, okay, the shaded slope and the sunny slope have two different thermal effects. And when we get up towards the head of the basin, that all kind of swirls and good luck sneaking in here, pal.
Yep.
And
the wind swirling is, for us, it's horrible. For elk, it's perfect. They're sitting there going, any scent that comes from any direction is going to come by my nose every 14 seconds here. So I'm going to know if there's danger trying to approach me from anywhere. You get on a hillside that has perfect thermals. The elk aren't going to just sit there on exposing themselves to half of the mountain, either above them or below them, because only half of the mountain actually protects them by thermals. The other half,
Right.
they have to either be able to use their eyes and look down the hillside if the thermals are coming, if thermals are coming up, they can use their nose to smell anything below them. So they have to bed in an area that they can either see above them or they can hear above them. And
Right.
they typically don't stray from doing just that, which
No.
makes it really hard for us to try to navigate a way to get close to them.
Yeah. And, this is just observing elk for however many decades. I am 100% convinced that those elk know, okay, today the winds, and they don't have a compass, but they kind of know, all right, it's coming out of the northwest. When it comes out of the northwest, I'm not going to bed in my morning bed where I did yesterday when it was more southwest, because there I don't have as much of a wind advantage because the way the thermals work, or a prevailing southwest mixing with the thermals, I'm going over to this spot to bed. That's the place I bed when there's a northwest wind in the morning. And then I get up and I move and I bed in a slightly different spot in the afternoon on the northwest prevailing. I'm convinced they are that deliberate and thoughtful
Absolutely.
in what they do. They know, they walk on that landscape all the time, and they are using their nose to detect danger. So they know where every little swirl pocket is, every little eddy based on what the thermal is, based on the prevailing. They know that so well, and we think it's all just random.
Yeah, there's not an elk out there that just bebops down a ridge and gets there. It's like, oh, I've got the thermals good right now. I'm going to just plop down right here in bed. They have, like you mentioned, every situation is covered. And if the area that they like to bed in primarily isn't conducive to keeping them safe that day, they're going to another area, and they know that area. They're like, hey, the winds are swirling all over. We're going to the head of the draw today, because anything that comes on either of these ridges or either of these two hillsides, we're going to smell it, and we're protected there. As soon as the thermals straighten out, we're moving up to the ridge and going over to this bench where we normally bed, and they will get up and move based on their safety, not based on hardly anything else. Everything they do, their movement from feed and water to their bedding area, where they bed, the time that they go to bed, the time that they get up and move to their feeding area in the evening, is 100% predicated by their use of their nose to keep them safe.
Yeah. And I always find myself making the mistake of assuming they're doing it just for the heck of it. I just decided to go on a stroll today. I'm going to lead my herd of cows. I'm the lead cow. I'm just going to lead them over here today. No. If she is leading them over there, she's leading them over there for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's probably not a reason we understand that well, but it's a reason that she is just dialed in on, and she's not making any exception to it. I'm here to stay alive until tomorrow.
For the next 5 minutes, my goal is staying alive. And
yeah,
and you said, it's maybe something we don't understand as well, but I really think it's something we can learn. And I think it's important to learn first, just the understanding that every movement an elk makes, every location where it feeds, where it waters, where it beds, all of that, it's already determined this is a safe thing for me to do. And when we understand that all of those movements are based on thermals and wind, it can really help us. The elk, there's no way they're going to be right here during the middle of the day, because the thermals are moving up the mountain and they're not going to be protected by their nose, so they're not going to bed here. So we can eliminate 90% of areas that an elk's going to bed just based on that. We can eliminate, or we can determine where they're going to be moving to, how they're going to move there. Are they going to go up the ridge? Are they going to go up the draw? Are they going to go up the hillside? Are they going to circle around? All these things, because we know they bed here, we know they feed here. It's not just drawing a straight line from A to B to get there. It's here's where I'm safest to bed. Here's where I've got good feed, and I've got to move from that point to that point and keep the thermals in my favor. The elk are going to use that. They're going to, they aren't plotting out. They just know from instinct, this is the way I have to move to get to where I need to go to stay alive.
Yeah. And when they get up out of their bed, they're not like when they, you get 5th grade basic geometry, the shortest distance between 2 points is a line. They don't get up and say, oh, I got to get to that feed spot over there, and they just take a straight line.
Yeah.
They have a path and a reason for why that route that they're going to take there on that afternoon, on that day, is what it is. Even if they bedded in the same spot and we're trying to get to the same feeding area 2 days later, if the wind is different, the temperature is different, which causes the thermals to be different, they're going to take a different route.
Yeah, I followed elk for 3 miles up a mountain. They leave this lush green meadow down in the bottom where they came to feed, and they turn and they go up over 3 different ridges through 2 different saddles for 3 miles to get to this little bench where they bed down. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking there have been 7 benches that met all the criteria that they could have bedded. They could have bedded 300 yards from where they were feeding. They could have bedded at any of these points along the way. Why did they choose to go all the way up here? Well, there's something they know that I don't know. Either, it's not going to be really safe for an elk to bed 300 yards away from where they feed, because that's going to make it a lot easier for a predator to pattern what they're doing and pick them off. You go 3 miles from where you feed to where you bed, and predators, most of them are going to be like, I'll just sit down here and wait, and hopefully they come back in. I'm not following them all the way up there and trying to figure out what they're doing. So they make it harder for predators to learn their patterns, to pick them off when they move long distances. Areas where they have no hunting pressure, where there's no predators, those elk are probably going to feed and go 200 yards and bed down. They might even bed down there in the lush grass right where they eat at night. But when there's predators and when there's hunting pressure, they're going to separate themselves. They're going to separate their bedding area from their feed area because it provides them more safety.
Yeah. Well, all that really comes into play in that setup. Yeah. Because they're watching them from 400 yards away, you got a little bit more forgiveness. All of a sudden, they're within 60 yards. You better have that wind dialed to what it's doing, or you're gonna pull a Randy and screw it up.
Yep.
Or
you might not have any say in screwing it up. It's just going to change, and then
yeah,
you didn't. And we can't control the wind. We can't control the thermals. Things happen where they change. But again, an understanding of how thermals work, we can come up with a plan that's going to minimize its effects, even if it does change. When you talk about thermals usually go straight up a mountain or straight down a mountain. I mean, it's a perpendicular line of where they go. And if you're trying to follow elk straight up the mountain from behind them and you've got the thermals straight in your face, you're thinking in your mind, this is 100% perfect. Thermals are coming right in my face. I'm behind the elk, following them up the mountain. Nothing can go wrong. But when those thermals switch, they're going to go 180 degrees switch, and now they're going straight at the elk. And it wasn't 100. It went from 100% perfect to 100% imperfect. Whereas if you get over on a parallel ridge to them and you're moving up, you've got the wind good. It's going in the right direction. But now if it switches and goes 180 degrees, if you're off to the side and across the hillside from that elk, now your scent's going up the mountain away from the elk, and it hasn't messed you up. So then you move in from that location sideways over to the elk with the thermals either coming perpendicular up and down across you. That minimizes the chances that elk's going to smell you if the thermals change. You only have instead of a 180 degree buffer of safety, you only have a 90 degree buffer. But that 90 degree buffer is a lot safer than putting that elk straight ahead of you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully people are cluing in on this, because that I think that's what separates archery hunting from rifle hunting. And I always tell people, look, I have a ton of fun rifle hunting, and I know that if I spend the same number of days each season archery hunting and rifle hunting, I'm any meat that ends up in my freezer probably ended up there with a rifle in my hand. But when it comes to challenge and exhilaration and just close encounters that cause you to get goosebumps, I never get that in rifle season.
Yeah,
but I get it a lot in archery season, and
multiple times. Even if you don't have an opportunity, you still get that rush and that adrenaline because you hear an elk bugle. You move in. I mean, it is a chess match the whole time. All these things changing, the elk moving, the thermals changing, the terrain the cover, the vegetation, all these things that are
Shade.
continually dynamic.
Yeah.
Every single step you take is a different setup and a different situation. And so you have to constantly be playing that chess match, trying to get close, trying to get in a good setup, trying to convince that elk to turn around and come in. And then all of a sudden, everything happens at once. And when it happens, if you're in a good setup, if that elk has been convinced that he's coming in, if you've got a collar back behind you that lures the elk through a shooting lane, if you've used your backdrop to conceal your outline, if you draw your bow at the right time, if the bull stops in a shooting lane, if you anchor just right and you put your pin on the elk and you squeeze off, then you can celebrate. But that's a lot of ifs that have to happen just to get to that point.
And that's a lot of information you have to process without hesitation.
Yeah.
I mean, as that encounter is happening, and this is where I think the really successful archery elk hunters, and I'm not putting myself in that category, separate themselves from the guys like me, is when they're going into that setup, they are every change of approach, every you move 10 yards, the entire setup's different. Now you have different shooting lanes. You have probably a different approach angle of the bull. The really good elk hunters are processing that and making that decision smartly and quickly. Or then you get guys like me who are like, boy, I gotta think about this. Well, Randy, this is not like a tax accountant problem where I get to go look it up online. I got to make a decision now. And so I'm always hesitant to move, even though there's times I should move, just because it's like, okay, I finally processed everything to where I think I got the perfect setup. Well, if the bull isn't going to come in any closer, it doesn't matter if I got the best setup.
Yeah.
I got to throw that aside, reprocess everything again 20 yards away and hope that he'll come there. And my deliberate way doesn't make me good at that.
Yeah. And that's why I call it a critical conjuncture. A critical juncture is a fork in the road. You come to a fork in the road and you've got to make a decision. I either go right or I go left, and you got a 50-50 chance. A conjuncture is a combination of all these circumstances, all these events, all these different factors that are coming together and either producing an outcome or a crisis. And, that's really what elk hunting and that setup point is all of these factors. It's not just one factor. It's not, okay, I got the wind good. I'm good. I'm going to set up right here. Well, you got the wind good, but the elk comes in and he's got a visual advantage 120 yards away. He's not coming any closer. You aren't getting a shot. Or you've got the wind good and the bull comes into 12 yards, but you're set up behind a great big wall of alders or, some big thick mass of vegetation. And all you can see is the white tips of his antlers there at 12 yards in front of you, and you have no chance of getting a shot. So just picking one factor and saying, okay, I've got this figured out. This is in my favor. Everything's good. There's like 10 different things that have to go right. And you've got to process that and make a decision to try to bring as many of those factors into your favor as you can on the fly, on the spot, and make it happen. Plus, you have to convince a wild animal to come into that position.
Not asking a lot.
No.
Oh, man. But, that's why I think archers just have this higher level of understanding. And I know some of the rifle hunters are going to be like, that's horse hockey. No, there's a different skill set and set of tools you use for rifle hunting. But the archery hunting part of it, there's a reason success rates are lower. There's a reason why everyone wants to do it and why it's so exhilarating when you have success, because of all those things we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about. They can all go wrong quickly.
Totally.
With zero room for error.
It's not like one is better than the other, or, one group of hunters is more skilled than another. It's just different. It's not, there's a different skill set that's required to be a successful archery hunter than a successful rifle hunter. And there's definitely crossover. I think rifle hunters absolutely need to understand thermals and wind, because elk can use their nose from 800 yards away. So if you're thinking there's an elk 400 yards away, it doesn't even matter what the wind's doing. Oh, it absolutely does. So there's definitely crossover, but there's some detailed technicalities that come into play in archery hunting that you just don't even have to think about. You don't even have to have any knowledge of to be a successful rifle hunter. And there's probably things on the rifle hunting side that, they could say are similar, that there's things that archery hunters don't understand, as whatever that might be. I'm not an experienced rifle hunter. I like rifle hunting and I rifle hunt, but when I'm out there, I feel more like a fish flopping around on the bank than in archery season. Maybe I feel like I'm at least in shallow water, and every once in a while I look up and there's an eagle circling above, and I'm not sure what to do. But
well, when I'm archery hunting, I feel like a fish in a Clorox pool. I know this is terminal, and it's probably terminal for me, not the elk. But we got another set of emails about people asking. A lot of people focus on bedding in strictly north slopes in archery season when it's warm. Yeah, the reason that it's not they're not bedding and using north exposed slopes, whether it's north, northeast, northwest, just because they got a compass that says, oh, that's a north slope. They're trying to stay cool. Right? They're super, super active that time of year. They're trying to thermoregulate, and a north slope is going to allow them to thermoregulate a whole lot better. Now, they can thermoregulate down in a canyon also. Sometimes there's not a slope. So one of the people wrote in and said, hey, I'm hunting non-migratory elk. There really aren't much for north slopes here. Where am I going to find them? You're going to find them wherever it is the coolest in the middle of the day. That might be in a canyon. It might be in a thick grove of aspens or where, sometimes out. I just think about the grasslands in New Mexico. Sometimes you look out there and you're like, that looks like an elk bedded in the shade of that pinyon tree. Pull up your spotter. That is an elk bedded in the shade of that pinyon tree. Why? Because it's the only thing they have for thermoregulation. A lot of times you see them bedded right up next to rocks that provide shade in areas that don't have a lot of trees. But in most of the mountain settings, you're most, I guess, protected from sunlight and heat is going to be northern type exposures. Also, anything with a drainage or a creek nearby, whether it's from the breeze of that or whatever, is going to drop the temperature some. So think about it more. And I always tell people, think about it more in terms of where's the coolest spot on the landscape when the weather's hot. And that's probably where they're going to want to bed for that day. And they know where it is.
I think that gets you a good macro view or a macro idea of where the elk are going to bed. But I think you have to take it a step further and look at where are they going to be safe also. So, you might say there's a north face right here. It's the coolest place on the mountain. But if the elk aren't safe there, they're not going to go to that coolest place on the mountain just because it's cooler. They absolutely are going to go where they're also safe. So it has to be that combination of the two. And you mentioned, an elk bedding underneath the only pinyon tree or, the only tree on an entire hillside. They're in that shade and they'll get up every 30 or 40 minutes and readjust just to stay in the shade because it's coolest. And you think about us when we're in direct sunlight and we just are forced to sit there and absorb those sun rays. It's like, where is shade? If I just had an umbrella, if I just had somebody standing right here, I would just kind of hunker down in their shadow because it's cooler and more comfortable there. Elk also are looking at where can I use my senses to stay alive? So I want to be cool. I have to thermoregulate, but I also have to stay alive. And so that's going to, thermals are a big part of that. Where are the thermals? Where is danger going to approach from? Thermals will protect me from, half of the landscape, either above or below wherever I'm bedding, depending on which way the thermals are going. But that other half, I have to rely on another sense, whether my sense of sight or my sense of sound, to be able to detect any danger. So I just think back to the elk I shot with you when we were in New Mexico that I slipped in on. It was exactly like what you just said, bedded underneath the only tree on the mountain there, in the shade of that tree. Well, it's sitting there able to look down the mountain. It can see anything down below it there because it's got the visual advantage being higher. It's got thermals coming up so it can smell anything down below it. So our only chance of getting close to that elk was getting above it. So we had to go clear around the mountain, come over the backside. Then we get above it. Well, now it's placed itself so up above there, it's all that little gravel, that noisy little gravel, and all this dead, dry brush and grass that crunches every time you make a move on it. It took me, 2 hours, 2.5 hours to move in 70 yards because I took my boots off. I took one step at a time. When I got to the point where there was no cover, I had to get down on my back and basically backwards crab crawl in there trying to be quiet because he had a visual advantage looking down the hill. He had thermals, looking down the hill. All he had to protect him from up above was listening. And so, we had a little breeze there that broke that up, but he's in the coolest spot he can, and he's protected by 2 of his 3 senses. And fortunately, I was able to stay quiet enough to get close to him and still almost managed to mess it up.
Yeah, that was a fun one to watch, but I think that is a good example. And I think your example earlier about why did the cows lead the bull 3 miles away when they crossed multiple cooler places they could have bedded? Well, they knew something about on that day with that prevailing wind, with the amount of hunting pressure maybe they'd experienced leading up to that day. No, there's all these cool places. I'm going to find the coolest place that's also the safest place. So it's not like you do this research through e-scouting and there's just one spot. Well, that's where they're going to be. No, there's probably 20 spots in every little area that they could be. And it's your job to snoop around, sort out, call, whatever, which of those 20 spots, or maybe it's only one of those 20 spots, is the one for that day.
That elk that day. And their previous experience bedding in a different place. They had a mountain lion stalk them in their bed at 1:00 in the afternoon yesterday in this other place. It's the prime place, but they had an experience there, so they're not going back there tomorrow. And you might go by there and be like, why didn't they bed here? It has everything. They would have been completely protected. And he went out on this wide open hillside and laid out in the sun where I know he wasn't comfortable. Well, there's a reason. He had an experience that you weren't a part of, that you don't have any knowledge of, that made his mind up for him that day. So not only do we have to think about where they're comfortable, where they're going to be safest, now all of a sudden they have all these random experiences that help them decide where they're bedding that day.
Which gets back to the point that every bit of this for an elk in any season, rifle or archery, is with intention.
Yeah.
They don't have the luxury that we have of saying, I'm just going to go sit out on the porch to have a cup of coffee and watch the sun come up this morning.
Because it's comfortable and fun.
Yeah. Or I'm going to run into town and, I'm going to pick up something at the hardware store and just kind of walk around for a while. Stop at my buddy Joe's and visit. No, they don't. Everything they do is with the intention of living another minute, another hour, another day, another year.
Yep.
They
don't go to a meadow and say, I am extra hungry. I haven't eaten for 3 days, so I'm going to stay here an extra hour this morning. And it's been an extra hour and the thermals are all wrong. Now I better hurry up to my bedding area. It's like, you better get a mouthful of grass because the thermals are changing and you need to be there now. Yep. And they just, like you said, they don't have the luxury of, a lot of the things we do are based on comfort. No. And they don't have that luxury to do things because it's comfortable.
Yep. Well, I've been out a little bit here lately, and I've seen some elk calves. They're so cool looking when they're kind of frolicking around. They're a few weeks old, and it's like, man, that gangly little thing's going to grow up to be 500 pounds someday or bigger. But I saw a video, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was one of your Idaho Game and Fish retired biologists talking about how effective black bears are at predating elk calves. And they did studies up in northern Idaho of how these bears just kind of like, and this gets back to why elk have to move and respond to predation, but the bears just learned this milk route of how to move across that landscape in June to gobble up as many elk calves as they could.
Yep.
And the impacts it had were significant. And
and I don't know if it's the same study. It probably is, but in the Lac-Sault-Selway region of Idaho back in, I want to say the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there, they did a predation study and they collared a bunch of elk calves. And I want to say it was 80 or 85% of those calves were killed by black bears, which shortly after that, they allowed 2 bears to be taken out of that unit to cut back on that predation. But you just think of the effects of 85% of calf recruitment is gone. That only leaves 15% of the elk each year to replace. It's not going to sustain. I mean, the population is on a downward turn, especially when there's other things, there's other mortalities there, winter kill, hunting, all of these things. 85% is unsustainable. And so something has to be done. But you think about that. What does it take, for a bear? That's their primary food source this time of year, is those elk calves. And they know that, and they're going to be where the elk calves are because it's an easy food source. And I honestly haven't seen an elk calf yet this spring, but I've seen several mule deer fawns, and their reaction, their instinct when there's danger is to lay down as flat as they can, chin on the ground, and don't move. And it doesn't matter if they're in the middle of a highway. That is their instinct, and they will lay down and just not move. And so bears use their nose to hunt, and they can smell these calves. And so these calves are just sitting ducks when they do lock down and hunker down like that, thinking they're safe. It's not hard for a bear to find a meal this time of year.
Yeah. Well, it kind of touches on 2 points. One, the life experience of these elk. There's always something hunting them year round. Wolves, mountain lions, black bears, grizzly bears, people. And so that raises their alertness. And these calves, from the day they stand up and no longer use hiding as their mechanism, they're making notes about, hey, Mama said I better do this. My buddy Chris over here, he didn't, and black bear ate him yesterday. I'm think I'm going to listen to Mom. And I'm trying to equate that to kind of the human teaching experience, but this is a life of continual learning and understanding for them to become adults. They don't get to become adults by being stupid, ignorant, not paying attention, and being responsive to the dangers they face. That's why they're so hard to put a tag on.
And it's hard for us to understand that because we are of the mentality of, I'm going to go touch that hot stove and it's going to burn. Elk don't get that luxury. They don't get the luxury of saying, I'm going to walk up to that bear and see if it wants to play, because they don't live. So it's ingrained in them, in their DNA and their instinct. Immediately, everything is danger. There's nothing, that we can be like, I'm going to be curious today and just see what happens. And parents sit back and be like, oh, this is funny. Watch what happens when he walks over there and touches that hot stove. That's not the way animals are wired to survive. And sometimes it's hard for us to separate that and understand every movement, every pattern, every habit, every second of every day. An elk is trying to stay alive, and we have to break that code. We have to find a way to get inside their mechanism for survival and be able to crack the code just to have a chance of getting close to them, to be able to try to call them in close enough to get a shot then.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, I wish maybe someone's done this study, but I've read a lot of elk studies and I've never seen it. I don't know how you would even do it, but it'd be interesting to know in the 5-year lifespan of your average bull elk, how many days his life almost ended because of an encounter with someone who wanted to eat them, someone or something. And I bet you'd be an impressive number.
Oh, yeah.
And think if we had a near-death experience 3 times a week, we'd be wired differently.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, we talk about near-death experiences like, wow, I know somebody that had one once, or, I've had one in my lifetime. Elk have near-death experiences literally every day. And then you think about our comfort. We have an experience where it's like, that was not fun. I'm going to take a week off and just go and relax and recoup and recharge my batteries here. Elk don't get a break. They go straight from they're laying there not eating for a month straight, just living off of the reserves as their marrow in their bones starts getting converted into energy for them. And now all of a sudden a pack of wolves comes over the mountain and chases them and deplenishes that. It's just everything that they do is about life and death.
Yeah. And the whole where I was wanting to lead with that is this study that the person had. He referred to many other studies that the quality of the habitat, which isn't just the food, it's the space, it's the lack of harassment, it's all kinds of things, is a big determinant in how much predation or how effective predators can be. So if you have a habitat that just has very few little key critical areas for them, well, the predator's like, I know they're going to be in one of these 3 premium feed spots, and that's where they focus. If you have habitat that has perfect conditions or really good conditions, at least scattered in multiple places across that landscape, the predator's got to work pretty damn hard to figure out where they're going to be. Or maybe he lucks out one day, but they're dispersed so well that it's not like he's sitting there picking off one every day for breakfast. And so the impacts of predation in high quality habitat are way, way less than the impacts of predation in marginal habitat. And his discussion did a good job of emphasizing what we read about in those studies. And so active forest management, all the things, invasive weed control, the things we talk about all the time. There's a reason why groups, the federal agencies, the state agencies, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, why they put a lot of resources in that. One, it grows more elk. 2, it protects more elk from the impacts of predation in a huge, huge way. So,
and that's why the whole wolf, issue was such a big deal. We've had mountain lions, we've had bears, all these things. Elk have learned how to escape that predation and survive. But each of those predators hunts in a completely different way. And elk, got comfortable with this terrain, this habitat, this area. These are ways I can survive against bears, against mountain lions. Now you throw wolves in there, that habitat's no longer safe for them. They've got to find new habitat, and now it's decreased the amount of area where they're safe, so that the available habitat for an elk to survive in went down dramatically because of wolves being in there. So now they're forced into smaller areas. They're not spread out like they were, and it makes it harder for us to find them. Even if the numbers are the same, the elk are in different areas. Right now, we've talked about it before, but in this area where I live, there are very few huntable elk because they've moved down into the lowlands, into the valleys where it's private land, because wolves just aren't as safe coming in there. And so the elk, rather than migrating back all the way up the mountain ranges, a lot of them are just staying down right where they winter, and they aren't moving back up because they're safe. And so all of these different things, when you think about an elk surviving, well, wolves, it's natural. They're going to kill a few. They only kill the weak and the sick, all of the nonsense that we were fed for a while. It's not just that. It is now there's a new predator there, and elk are not able to survive in the same way and in the same areas that they were previously. And so they've got to adapt to that. And it minimizes the actual available habitat for elk. Even though there's great feed, there's great security from bears and from mountain lions right up the ridge here. If an elk goes up there and beds down for a night, it's going to get picked off by a pack of wolves.
Yeah. Well, and you think about what bears feed on. Yeah, this time of year they eat elk calves, but once elk calves can outrun them, they're like, you know what? It's a good thing the berries are starting to pop up here in
Yep.
July and August because I'm going down to the berry patch here. Mountain lions are like, maybe I'll catch a rabbit or a deer or who knows what it might be. They're very, very adaptable. Wolves, for the most part, hey, there's 6 or 8 of us here. We're not going to get much out of a rabbit. We're going to kill each other fighting over the fur on that rabbit. We better go get us an elk.
Yeah.
And so the year-round effect of that predator compared to the other predators that were on the landscape is dramatically different.
Yep. And like you said, the way that they hunt a bear is primarily looking for calves the end of May through the middle of June. After that, it's moving back up the mountain. It's looking for berries. A mountain lion, it's going to hunt year round, but it is a silent, stalker. It comes in, it stalks in on something. It gives it a quick attempt. The elk runs up the hill 400 yards. That fight's over. That elk survived. It's good to go. A pack of wolves, they hunt completely differently. They gang up on it. They circle around. They don't give up. They run that thing until it's out of energy, and then they move in and kill it. So it's just all of these things coming at elk from different angles. And I mean, really, what we're talking about here, this discussion is elk are going to survive. And it makes it harder and harder for us to be successful as an elk hunter because of all of these different factors. And the elk sense of survival that just gets more and more fine-tuned every day.
Yep. Well, I hope that people think about that in maybe a bigger context of, okay, yes, habitat is important, but maybe I should be out hunting bears. Maybe I should go and hunt wolves in states where it's allowed. Or if it's not allowed in my state, I need to be working hard to figure out a way to do it. And I wish I could tell you there's a snap of the finger and that it's easy, just like this. That then becomes a political game. But I hunt a lot of bears. I eat a lot of bear. And I'm not saying, I'm here saving elk. That's not. I just love to hunt. I love to be in the woods in the springtime. And I know that there is this balance. I'm sure that'll generate some emails like, bears have been eating elk forever. They don't need you to chase them off. Okay. I guess what? People have been hunting bears forever also and eating bears forever. So guess we're equal. But,
yeah. No, and it really comes down to our responsibility to be stewards of the land and stewards of the wildlife. And that is our job as hunters. Hunting is the management tool that's used to conserve elk, to conserve all wildlife. That's fishing, hunting, upland game, bird, whatever it is. Hunting is used to manage that wildlife. And without hunting, we don't have a say in the management of it. And the management of it isn't about how many freezers can we fill and how many elk can we kill before we get right to that razor's edge. It is, where are the healthiest numbers and populations and habitat for these animals? And we can use hunting as a micro tool to go in and adjust that to keep it at that healthy level. And all of a sudden you get all these predators in there that not only change that the landscape of how the animals survive, but also change the landscape of their population and the numbers that are needed to sustain these predators. It makes hunting a lot more difficult to use as a management tool, but it makes it even more vital that we maintain that as a management tool, because without hunting, these cycles start swinging wildly back and forth, and the animals are the ones that suffer.
Yeah. Well, it's all those things, it's hunting, it's management, it's habitat. It'd be nice. Wouldn't it be nice if it just like every, the modern day world, I want an easy answer and I want it now. Well,
just give me a straight equation that works across the board.
Yeah. Growing elk herds and keeping elk herds abundant is not easy. It doesn't happen quickly, but hunters have shown to be pretty darn successful at it. And hopefully we keep at that. So we got another guy who kind of, I think he was trying to give me a case of the red ass here, which is okay. We got to pull those ones up every once in a while too, right?
Yeah.
We get a few of those. So a guy says, I'm a South Carolina resident. I hunt elk every year in Colorado, and I've been collecting points in many Western states. Randy talks a lot about the allocation of non-residents versus residents in each state. I want Randy to justify why he's allowed to hunt in other Western states when his home state has a rule of only giving, and he put in quotations, up to 10%. And he wrapped it up by saying there's something about Montana residents should be limited from applying in other states, is what he applies. Up to 10% is a crime. Okay, I get that. Corey and I both live in states where it's up to 10% for our limited entry tags. The thing that math that he put out there fails to say is in Montana, we statutorily give 17,000 non-resident tags. If there were if all the residents of Montana said, I'm done elk hunting, by our state law, we're given 17,000 non-resident tags, and then it'd be 100% non-resident hunting. You guys in Idaho give away, I think it's 12,000 general or region
tag. Yeah.
So there are 3 states that are up to 10%: Montana, Idaho, and Arizona when it comes to the limited entry tag. So
on limited entry, yes, and that's a distinction. We also have a set aside pool that non-residents can get, but then they can also draw up to 10%. So there is a limit. They can't draw more than that.
Right. So I get that it's tag season, right? And not everybody got their tag, and people get frustrated. But to ask me to quote unquote justify why I can apply in other states, well, I can apply in other states because just like the person from South Carolina, I'm a non-resident in 49 other states, and there's about 8 or 10 Western states that allow non-residents to apply for elk in those states. So me and him are standing in the same shoes in Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon.
Yeah. So be grateful that Randy's state of Montana sets aside all of those tags for those of us who don't live in Montana to have an opportunity to go there. I don't know that Randy needs to justify why he can apply for other states, but the rule and the way that the system is set up is just for that, so that we can have opportunity, because states are not bound to give non-residents opportunity. They're bound to care for the animals for the residents of that state. The fact that they give them to non-residents is a bonus that we as non-residents shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah. I mean, I could justify it by saying, well, the reason I should get to do it is because we give 17,000 non-resident elk tags every year. South Carolina gives 0. Yeah. By that logic, you shouldn't be allowed to apply in any other state.
That's right. Isn't there some reciprocity clause somewhere that some states have that?
They do for certain species, but I'm kind of joking about it, and I'm glad the guy wrote in. I get that people are frustrated. I mean, I applied in every state in the West for elk this year. I didn't expect to draw for a couple of reasons. One, I still have a good chunk of a moose in my freezer from last year. I already plowed through a pronghorn and a deer and a coos deer. And a bear from 2023. So I still got some moose left. So I'm like, all right, I got my Montana elk tag. I got my Montana deer tag. The crew is helping me whittle away that moose. And some of the crew is really good at whittling away that moose, which is great. But I thought, you know what? This is probably the year I swung for the fences more than I ever have for elk in the West. And the probabilities that I think the best chance I had was the Idaho controlled hunt I applied for last year. The odds were like 10 or 11%. Well, even though I did, let's see, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Oregon. I did 8 states. The odds were still not very likely that I was going to draw. So
Yep.
It's how it is, and it's a state-based system. Residents are going to get priority. And we've been through this time and time again already this year, and it seems like we go through it every spring and winter because we do get these kind of comments and emails. But when you're doing the math on these things, I guess that's the other point is don't just look at the 10% of controlled hunts.
Yeah.
Some people say, well, Colorado cut us from 35% down to 25%. Well, yeah. Or they cut us from 25 to 20%, whatever number you get cut. Well, Colorado still has an awful lot of over-the-counter tags.
Yeah.
Wyoming.
And they still give a lot of draw tags to non-residents.
Right. Yeah. Wyoming has, I think they have to give away 7,250 non-resident elk tags every year by law. So they give away 16% of their limited entry tags to non-residents. And if that came to 2,000, well, they got to make up that 7,000 something with general tags.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say, well, Wyoming only gives us 16% of the tags. No, Wyoming gives us way more than 16% of the tags. And if you want to talk about elk tags in general, Montana, we don't have a cap on cow tags for non-residents. So we have, I think, I can't remember. It's over 10,000, I think, non-resident cow elk hunters. So we take these numbers and we get frustrated and we throw it out there. And as a numbers guy, kind of like, if you want to talk numbers, I'm here all day, man. Pack a lunch. I'll talk numbers with you. But you might want to have your numbers
dialed in. Well, and it's hard to say, Randy, you live in a state that limits how many elk tags somebody coming from another state can have. So you, as a resident of that state, shouldn't even be allowed to apply in or to hunt in another state. And that makes no sense. That's each state decides whether Randy doesn't have to justify anything. Each state decides whether Randy can or cannot apply and get an elk tag in that state. So if a state says we only have 5 elk tags here, everybody applies for them, Randy has a right to be one of those people that applies. If a state says just show up and we'll give you an elk tag like Colorado has been, Randy has a right to show up and get an elk tag. And if his state that he lives in of Montana decides one day that, you know what, we don't like people from Delaware, well, that's the rule that they end up making, and we've got to live by it. And that's there's no justification needed. I think what's needed is we all need to understand how the game works, and we all need to understand what we can do to make the game better for everybody and for the animals, and play a part in that.
Yeah, and my goal is to make elk the most abundant nuisance animal in Montana. I'll do anything and everything I can to put more elk out on any state's landscape. My goal would be that elk are considered a nuisance animal. There's so many of them.
Yep.
And then, we would talk about it that way. But hey, I think it's good for people to know that we do get our share of, I don't know, pointed comments, and that's good.
And honestly, comments like that, it was respectful. It wasn't like he said, you're a clown and you this. It was, hey, I'm concerned. Why can you justify why you can apply for other states and non-residents are limited to this, or whatever the clause is? So we're wide open to that. I think that the thing to keep in mind is, like Randy said, we're all non-residents in 49 other states, and for somebody from South Carolina, their frustration with the state of Montana, I live in Idaho. I've got the same frustrations, especially if I don't understand the system completely. It would be really easy to be frustrated about it we've got those same frustrations we have to deal with in every other state except for the one state we live in. And it's important to remember that, yes, it's easy to start dividing us by residents and non-residents, but it's a lot easier to pool us all into the same category of sportsmen who have very similar concerns across the board.
Yeah. So anyhow, if anyone wants to give Randy or Corey an earful, it's elktalkpodcast.com. But another reason we decided to bring that one up is I thought he was respectful about it. We do get some who are like, you guys are a bunch of blah, blah. It's like, okay, you may as well stand outside and yell. That's going to have the same impact on our thinking as some, crazy comment. But it's all helpful in the bigger picture of the discussion and understanding. So I appreciate that the guy sent it, and it's kind of tongue in cheek there, of kind of jousting with it. But so what else we got? We had a whole list of other ones. You can tell when tags come out, a lot of people. I like how they're respectful of, look, I'm not asking for a hunting hole, but if you've hunted this unit, can you kind of tell me where to start?
Can you give me a pin of where I'll find elk?
That's
what I like. I'm not looking for a honey hole. Just if you could point me in a direction of where I'll find elk.
Yeah. And so if we reply to quite a few of those, and not necessarily here, but through emails. And it's not that we're quote unquote intentionally vague. It's our premise is that we give you ideas and concepts and principles to help you find your own elk. Or elk on your own, I guess, or however, not elk that you own, but when you go out there, you have these ideas, this knowledge, these understandings of elk and elk behavior and elk needs, so that no matter whether it's a drought year or a wet year, no matter whether it's an early winter or a late summer, you have the tools to go out there and assess it and be adaptable and have success. You and I could give someone, well, in 2017, they were right here. Well, guess what? It snowed 4 feet on October 1st, and it pushed all the elk out of the mountain. That's why they were right there. So if I gave you that waypoint, 12 out of the other 13 years, you'd go there and be like, Newberg just left. He led me astray. That blankety boy. He put me on a goose chase. But no,
not only that,
I hope
but if we were giving out that information, thousands of people would be coming to us asking us for that information, and you'd end up in that spot with 999 other people, and none of them would be very happy with this. So I've always felt it's way more advantageous to teach people and share with people the why. Why are elk where they are? If you understand that, then you can go out and find your own place to find elk. If I tell you where they are, that might be helpful for one person one time. But if everyone understands the different reasons why there are elk there, why they move, what they're looking for at different times of the year, then you can go out and find your areas based on that knowledge and be able to adjust on the fly when something changes, rather than, well, he gave me the spot and there's nothing here. Now I guess my hunt's over. I don't know where to go. I don't have a plan B. You can make your own plan B on the fly because you know why elk need what they need and determine where they're going to be from that.
Yeah. So that's the hope. That's the premise of this podcast and most of the other content you and I produce in other places. But I want to circle back around before we end up, this elk, summit or what? You and Donnie are.
The elk camp we're doing.
Elk camp. Okay. Are you guys going to focus on all this setup stuff that we talked about earlier in this podcast?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of what we're doing is it's going to be out in the mountains, and I've done lots of seminars in auditoriums, on stages with PowerPoint and screens, created online courses. All of these things are great, but nothing compares to being on the mountain and physically pointing out a setup, physically pointing out a path that an elk will come in, physically hearing an elk bugle over on a ridge and saying, if I want to get from right here to right there, what are the thermals doing right now? Check it, see which way the wind's blowing, move in that direction, go up in there. So we're going to go basically from locating elk. We hear an elk bugle, it's in a position. We have to move towards that elk to get close enough to be able to call it in. We get in, we look around, we identify the setups, the potential negative setups, the potential positive setups. We set up, then we talk about the strategy that's used to call that elk in. And we're going to have different scenarios where it's a herd bull with cows, where it's a younger bull with cows in a heavily hunted area. So he's pressured and he's just not as conducive to come in, and he's wanting to get away. He's wanting to stay with the cows. All of these different scenarios we're going to walk through, and we're going to talk about what we do, calling tactics that we use to influence an elk to come in. All of them, though, maintaining and talking about the importance of the setup. And so, yeah, it's going to be hands-on. There's 8 different activities we're going to go through, which are basically different calling situations and scenarios that utilize different tactics. And in every one of them, we're going to be in different setups. So we have to identify the obstacles that are going to prevent that elk from coming in or prevent us from getting a shot in that specific scenario.
Wow. That's going to be a lot for people to absorb.
It is. Yeah. That's why it's taken 3 days to do that.
I guess I should have signed up, dang it.
Well, it's just, we get asked a lot, you and I both, and a lot of other people.
Yeah.
What would it take for me to come hunt with you? If I could just hunt with you for 1 day or for 3 days, well, September it's sacred time. And there's only a couple people that I'm able to share that time with in September. And doing seminars is fun, and it's, there's value in that and all that. But I think this is the next best thing to being able to actually go on a hunt with somebody. We're able to basically recreate a hunt and a situation in real time, in real elk country, and walk through what we do to process that and hopefully lead to success.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'll look forward to a report of what people have to say. And I'm sure they'll email us and say, Corey, I want my money back. Or Corey, you didn't charge it. Maybe they'll say, Corey, you didn't charge enough.
Well, it's always that balance of, but it's going to be a first class event regardless. I mean, just everything from the setup, the situation, the people involved, the camaraderie, the activities in the evening, the food, the location where we're doing it. Everything's going to be first class, and hopefully the education alone is worth it. The rest of the experience hopefully puts it over the top.
Yeah. And if you aren't already subscribed to the University of Elk Hunting via outdoor class, you can go do that. And between now and when elk season opens, you'd be a really busy person watching a lot of video, learning calling tactics, setup. What we talked about in an hour here, you've got days of content out there. So that's another option if they're so interested. And I think promo code Elk Talk will save them 20% or something. But you get an email and you want to help the person, but the question requires so much explanation. It's like, I don't have 22 hours to provide all the information here. I'm sorry. I know this sounds like a sales pitch, but if you really want the best answer to this, go watch Corey's chapter on that out at the University of Elk Hunting. And for those of you who I make that recommendation to, I apologize that it might sound like a sales pitch, but I firmly believe that the best library of elk hunting information on Al Gore's internet. All right, I just generated a bunch more emails. The guy took credit for claiming he invented the internet, so that's why I always say it. But anyhow, the best place out on the World Wide Web, I think, is the University of Elk Hunting and the other classes, that outdoor class. But I might
that are continuing to grow. You and I are filming a cow elk hunting module here in just a week or two that'll be available at some point in the near future, and I've had other discussions with Outdoor Class. We're in the process of working on e-scouting during, for finding elk during the rut, and all sorts of other information that's continuing to be added there.
No, that'll be cool stuff. And when you get here to Bozeman, tell me what ice cream you want. I'll make sure there's some in the fridge for you when you show up here.
I'll make sure and do that.
Well, Corey, I got to go work out this afternoon. I'm going to pay.
Yes, you do. How many days did you take off? I was going to say, you've been trying to fish. Yeah.
Yeah. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was doing laps around a walleye boat. You don't get a lot of exercise there, and you don't get a lot of strength training pulling in a 18-inch walleye. They're kind of like reeling in a wet sock anyhow. Walleyes aren't known to be fighters like pike or trout, so you don't know if you're whirling in a big wad of weeds or what. So and I know this is profiling, but I could go to a sporting goods store and I could look at who are the mountain backcountry fishermen and who are the walleye fishermen. Us walleye guys, we tend to be a little more portly. Sitting in the bow of the boat, just jigging all day long is, I get more exercise watching TV than I do walleye fishing. So I'm going to pay.
You've had 3 days off from working out, and now you're going in on a Friday afternoon to get a weekly workout in.
Yeah. And I'm going to make up for it by hiking hard Saturday and Sunday. And
the good news is you're going and you're doing it. So kudos to you for doing it. You could easily say, you know what, I haven't done it for 3 days. I'm just going to take the weekend off and start over on Monday.
Well, I did think I kind of earned a vacation, but don't be planting those seeds in my mind. I got over the motivation hump, Corey, to go do it. Now you're giving me all this kind of side baggage to think about. It's going to talk me out of it.
I'm giving you kudos for doing it. Good for you.
All right. I'm going to try. If I tip over, just don't let my wife sell the rifles for what I told her I paid for them.
They're worth far more than that.
Yeah.
Well, tell our friends over at Mountain Tough hello, and we'll get you next time.
Yeah. Have a great weekend. Take care of Jennifer's foot. Get her back up walking again so she can mow the lawn,
I just mowed the lawn this morning. I vacuumed last night. Her having a broken ankle's given me a lot of opportunities to build up some time away in September. So.
Yeah. Well, I got too handy too much this summer, and man, I am paying for it. Kim is like, I knew you could do that stuff. Why are you up to something? Why have you been doing so much of this stuff? It's like, I'm going back to paying the man. I am done with this stuff. So yeah. But my wife does. She just has a bum elbow right now. She didn't have a broken leg. So and it's probably helpful that you mow the lawn every third time anyhow, right? Instead of her.
Every third time while she has a broken leg, right?
Well, no, every time.
Every third time. Leg. Okay, gotcha.
Come on, Corey, you're making me look like a bad husband. I proved that without trying. And
you might not be a bad husband, but you definitely have some bad marriage advice from time to time.
Oh, I wish I could remember what it was when we were out on the boat fishing this week. Kim said, put that on your podcast. I can't remember what it was now, but I'm like, nope, not putting that on the podcast. So maybe I need a t-shirt. Put that on your podcast.
Yeah.
All right, Corey, you have a great weekend.
You too. And we'll catch everybody in the next episode.
Thanks for listening, folks.